I'm a researcher of music at the University of Oxford, and for the last few years I've been investigating how people hear the music, sounds and silences of traditional English churches, what those sounds mean to those people and what they do for them. Evensong is one of my own private passions, but it's also one of my particular areas of academic interest, which I've been researching from the perspectives of psychology and sociology to see what can be learned about why people go to Evensong today and what they think and feel when they're there. It's therefore my absolute pleasure and privilege to have been invited to introduce this session, in which in just a moment we're going to hear about 4 successful Evensong initiatives implemented by society members. But before we do so, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to set the scene for these initiatives by highlighting what the evidence I and others have gathered tells us about the place of Evensong today. I'm not able at the moment to give you a summary of all my own research findings because my thesis has yet to go through all the necessary stages to enable me to do that. But I can share some relevant highlights from the evidence I've gathered and tell you about what it tells us about Evensong today. And I look forward to sharing more with you soon. Today, I've got 3 headlines. The first is that in 21st century Britain, as you no doubt already know, there is a hunger for Evensong. Around 20 years ago, the Church of England began to report growing weekday cathedral congregations, and subsequent research commissioned by the Church and others found that much of this growth was down to Evensong. In fact, by 2012, 21 out of 35 cathedrals that provided Evensong-specific data said that their Evensong congregations were growing. That's more significant than it sounds, given the general trend in church attendance. At the same time, the BBC's weekly Choral Evensong broadcast audience increased by 20% after barely varying for decades. Of course, there are many varieties of Evensong, not just the choral kind that happens in cathedrals. And as we will hear shortly, churches of many types are home to the Evensong service, and statistics aren't available for attendance in all of them. But what is available anecdotally is that many of the churches that are offering Evensong services are experiencing growing congregations. But I don't want to give the impression that the hunger for Evensong is measurable only by numbers, or indeed that Evensong is valuable only because of them, which brings me to my second point. That is that the quality of the experiences people have at Evensong, not just the quantity of the people that have them, is what makes it so important that we talk about Evensong and how we can share it more widely today. One of the most striking findings in my own work is the great power that Evensong can have and the substantial beneficial impact on the lives of many of the people who attend it. The 2,000 plus responses I received to one of the surveys I conducted, one that, as it happens, was specifically about cathedral Evensongs, but which had many transferable findings, and many people wrote to me about the experiences in their parish churches, made it abundantly clear. Many participants in my research described Evensong as a need. They talked about depending on it, needing a top-up of it, taking 4-hour round trips to get to it, and even building their lives in such a way that they could access it easily when they needed it. One interviewee who'd been dealing with some life challenges that are beyond what I could imagine told me, part of the power of Evensong is that I know that if I can just get myself there, I can guarantee that what I will feel is a wonderful feeling. The Reverend Dr. Sam Wells has described his Evensong congregations as arriving tortured, anxious and exhausted in heart and mind and body, and leaving transformed, drenched in the glistening wonder of God's love. And as one Evensong goer who wrote to me during the pandemic said, times of feeling anxious, powerless, isolated and cut off would have been assuaged by being able to share in Choral Evensong. There is a real sense of divine presence and calm in the service, which works against these feelings. My third and final headline is that just as there are different types of Evensong, there are different types of Evensong goer, and as many varieties of Evensong experience as there are people that attend. For some people, at some times, Evensong affords peace and tranquility. For others, it's about time for deep reflection. For others still, it's about being in the company of others in a quiet, predictable, but not necessarily interactive way. For others, it's about hearing inspirational values that challenge those prevailing in everyday life and contemporary culture. What was also striking was that every aspect of the service was the most meaningful and the most enriching to someone. The Magnificat, the Nunc Dimittis, the anthem, the prayers, the collects, a very large contingent of psalm enthusiasts, different elements for different people across the ages at different moments in our lives. One of the great virtues of Evensong, it seems to me, from the wonderful accounts that I've heard through my research, is that it really can offer something for, as the prayer book puts it, all sorts and conditions of people. I very much look forward to hearing from our contributors about how it does that and how more of us can do that. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the first of these. We've got Michael Keeler-Walker, who's going to tell us about his own Evensong initiative in Canterbury, where he's grown an Evensong congregation from single figures to over 70. We've got 4 speakers and we're going to hear from each of them and then take questions at the end. So if you've got a question, a thought or an idea, do make a note of it and we'll come back to you after all of the 4 speakers. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from St Paul's Without the Walls Church in Canterbury. About 4 years ago, we had Choral Evensong in theory once a month, but realistically, it was irregular. It was often shunted off by different things. We would have a choir of about 18 and a congregant of 1, and usually they were the one doing the reading. We were in a worship committee meeting, and literally Evensong was moments from being agreed to be scrapped when I said, no, come on, this is a really good service. Let's see what we can do to build up some interest on that. And so we went back to basics in some senses. We put Evensong back on the regular agenda, which meant that it was then once a month, the same Sunday. It was originally the second Sunday. Post-pandemic, it's moved to the third Sunday. And it happens in groups of 3, so January, February, March, May, June, July, and then September, October, November. We decided to have supper with it. We decided that what we wanted to do is we wanted to offer 4 things. We wanted to offer good music. We had that already, but actually the choir had dwindled a bit because they were just singing the sung parish Eucharist on Sundays and only occasional Evensongs. They didn't have much of an interest to sing in terms of the range of music. And we wanted to offer good food, and we introduced that home-cooked food afterwards. There's no fee, we just take donations for food, and there's wine as well, of course. We wanted the fellowship as well in terms of having a gathered community, because actually there was, even though it was a very beautiful service, when there was only one other person there, it was a bit depressing to go to. So actually to have people to come along and have a group of people was very important. And then the other thing that we did is that we decided to bring in guest preachers. Now, please don't see that as a slight against our own ministry team, who are excellent. But what we wanted to really do is we understood that, particularly in winter, getting people out to Choral Evensong on a wet, cold night can be tricky. And the beauty of the service is a big draw, but there was other things that we wanted to do to make sure that there was a good interest as well. We went back to basics in terms of the service. There was no mucking around with the service. It is straight prayer book Evensong. We use King James versions of the Bible for our readings. We don't use that in any of our other services at all. So it's unashamedly traditional. It's our USP, as it were. And we've just introduced themes to the service as well now. So we did our first theme this month, which was one of our patronal saints. And then going forward, we'll have a theme each time, as well as the guest preacher as well. The first one actually did garner quite a bit of interest. We were starting to build up the congregation. I think the first one that we had was 17 plus the choir of about 18, and the choir has grown in the time that since we've introduced Evensong, because actually on a regular basis they've got very interesting and different pieces of music to sing to, a big range of music. And then it just built up over the course of 4 years, really. And particularly in the summer, we could get anything, including the choir, up to 70. The choir had grown in strength from about 18 regularly up to 25 and pushing above that. And so even after the pandemic, when we held it last week, we were over 50. It was great to crash through the 50 mark again, which was really good. And we find people coming along who don't just go to our Sunday services or not necessarily connected. We find that people are drawn into the Choral Evensong and Supper. And I mean, it's really quite an achievement, because our church is literally about 200 yards from Canterbury Cathedral, where there is Choral Evensong every day. So we have to really punch above our weight to bring people in on of an evening to when there's literally cathedral style Evensong next door. But it's been a great thing. We've reached lots of new people. We're interacting with people that we didn't do before, and we've also raised money for good causes in the parish through the donations for the food as well. So it's been an excellent initiative, and it's been hugely successful and enriched our parish life greatly.
Michael, congratulations. That sounds absolutely amazing. And is it possible to say the people that have come and started to come to your service who weren't previously people who were members or visitors or attendees at your church services, what were they looking for, and what do they find in your Evensong that they're not finding somewhere else?
I think it's just very good quality across the board. It's good quality worship, it's good quality preaching, it's good quality food, it's good quality fellowship. And you don't necessarily get that, all of those four things with the Choral Evensong in other parishes in the local area, because they're not necessarily offering all of those things. So you might have some people who initially potentially just came along for the food and then have grown to come and love Choral Evensong from that, and then vice versa. But we do have some people who don't stay for supper, who are just enjoying the quality of the service and the quality of the music and the teaching. And I think it's one of those services where people can come and join in with the body of people, but they're not necessarily asked to join in. They can just sit there, they can just relax, they can just let the music and the words flow through them and over them, and I think they really appreciate that. You know, as soon as they walk through the door, we don't jump on them and ask them to join the coffee rota and things like that. And I think some people do quite like the anonymity of coming along to some services where the fellowship is very much afterwards rather than during the service, and they're not, you know, there's no pressure to interact with people if they don't want to. Not many like that, but we do have some people who are drawn to that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I find that too. I'm sure everybody will have lots of questions for you, so don't go far. We're about to move on to our next speaker, who's going to tell us about another initiative. We've got the Reverend Sarah and then Noosh, forgive me, is that correct?
It's close enough.
Okay. Who has been restoring regular worship at Chichester's oldest church, which is now used as a bookshop. Welcome. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I should confess here that I'm a vicar of a parish north of Chichester, and we don't have any Book of Common Prayer services, I'm afraid. And as I work with the chairman of the Prayer Book Society, that is an awful confession to have to make. However, yes, I work with Bradley at St Olave's Christian Bookshop in Chichester, the oldest church, still consecrated, although it ceased being a parish church in the 1950s. We've always had an annual service on St Olave's Day to keep it consecrated, to keep it going. But we had a refit earlier in this year, which opened up the space, and we realised that actually it's a very good flexible space for services. So we started in October. Sorry, I'm just realising I'm glaring. There we go. We started in October with Evensong at Olave's. As our previous speaker, we are also about 200 yards from a cathedral which has Choral Evensong every evening. But we decided that we would do a congregational, traditional Evensong once a month. We time it to start at 5:30 so that people who work in Chichester can come along after work. If they've been shopping in Chichester, they haven't got to hang around for too long before they come. We also offer refreshments. We have our Evensong. We then have light refreshments. We haven't got to home-cooked meals yet. It's just drinks and nibbles. And then we also follow it with a speaker. We started with the Archdeacon of Chichester talking about the prayer book and the Evensong service. We then had a local historian who's written a book about the little churches of Chichester, which includes us. And then next month, we're having a reflection on Advent. We weren't sure how it would go. Our regular congregation for the annual service was about 30. We thought we'd be lucky if we got maybe 10. Our average congregation has been between 25 and 30. And they are interestingly drawn. Obviously, we don't have a congregation. We're not a parish church. So it's interesting that we've drawn people from local churches within Chichester who may or may not have prayer book services themselves, and also from outlying villages. So our congregation at these services range from people who are exploring the prayer book to those who have loved the prayer book and just want to come along to any service that offers them an opportunity to enjoy Evensong. So it's an interesting initiative, and probably unique in that it is held in a commercial retail premises, but it is offering a growing congregation.
Sarah, thank you. I'm really interested in the point that you make about there not being a regular congregation, so people coming together just for Evensong. I just wonder whether you have any sense from the people that you've been speaking to who come to these services, actually whether that might be part of the attraction. We heard from Michael about the anonymity that Evensong can afford. Do you think that's something that's at play in the services that you've been offering?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the majority of those who come are regular customers. We know most of them, but yes, they can come to the service. There's no expectation that they will come every month. There's no expectation that we will grab them for the coffee rota, or that we'll ask them to take on reading or anything. They can just come, they can sit. Some leave after the service and don't stay for refreshments and the talk. Others enjoy catching up with other people and finding out what they're doing, maybe in their local churches. But yeah, there's the anonymity. There's the we come, we worship, and then we can take our worship home with us. We don't have to extend it any further.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of talk about anonymity in the theories about why people are being drawn to go to Evensong these days. And a lot of what I've encountered is that that's quite a nuanced idea in reality, and that there are people who are known, like people who come to your bookshop. But what they mean by anonymity is that they don't necessarily, their name is known, but they don't necessarily want to talk about their beliefs at the moment, and that's not something they feel able to do. And that Evensong offers them an opportunity to be with other people and engage, and perhaps be known by name, but not necessarily to do that.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously, Bradley and I know most of them, but we don't ask them what their tradition is. We don't ask them where they worship. We don't ask them if they worship anywhere else. They just come to the bookshop either as customers or as congregation, and the two don't actually link, other than that they know we're there.
Sarah, thank you very much. Please take your virtual seat next to Michael as we bring in the next speaker, who is going to be Jonathan Pease, who is responsible for the East London Evensong Choir. Jonathan. Are you there? Wonderful. Over to you.
Let me just unmute myself. Here we go. Good afternoon. I'm here to speak a little bit about the East London Evensong Choir. There's no prizes for guessing what that's about. It was designed to share the beauty of Choral Evensong in London's East End. I'd love to pretend it was a sort of bold missionary venture, but it wasn't. It was set up by complete accident, and I don't make any secret of that. I took over an Anglican church as director of music in East London, where Choral Evensong was sort of limping on. It wasn't my background, it wasn't my tradition. At the time, I didn't really understand it. There was a very small congregation. Even the biggest advocates for Evensong in the choir didn't always turn up. And I have horrible memories of waiting for sort of 6 hours or so after the parish Eucharist to provide over a disaster, and disaster it sometimes was. And I thought, why on earth are we doing this? And amid these disasters, a few very able people in the choir were making bizarre and unreasonable demands. They were saying, why aren't we doing Stanford in very intricate pieces of music that were written for the Evensong service? And I thought, well, you must be joking. It's completely impossible with the resources we have. What's going on here? So we did something across East London to come and join us. And I told them all the same lie, which was that there was going to be this sort of cathedral model, full fat, sort of extravagant, over the top choral evensong on a particular date, and I lied to just enough people that it sort of came off and they all turned up in the same room at the same time, and they delivered, and it was a really wonderful afternoon, and it was the birth of the East London Evensong Choir. And I'm not speaking like this just out of kind of British self-deprecation. I think it's just really important that people know that things don't always go according to plan. Sometimes things are sort of born of disaster and unexpected circumstances, and that's sort of what happened to us. So a year after setting that up at a particular church, something a little bit heartbreaking happened, and I'd sort of realized that the priorities of the church I was working at had sung, because it just wasn't their sort of style of worship anymore. And a wonderful accident happened, which is that we ended up with this sort of really splendid choir and into a touring choir, and it sort of roved its way around the East End, which is not an area famed for its sort of magnificent choral worship. And we shared choral evensong with all these different churches in the area that would not normally have the opportunity to experience it. And I was very new to the Church of England at the time, and I didn't anticipate quite what a range of responses we would get from calling up different vicarages and saying, can we come and lay on choral evensong for you, ranging from wild enthusiasm and can you come every week, to them putting the phone down on me. I mean, it's something that seems to evoke a very wide range of reactions depending on the churchmanship of the church. But I will say that there was just a real beauty in particular in sharing evensong with churches where it just wasn't their usual style of worship. So I remember it sharing with a sort of HTB sort of plant style church that allowed us to come and do it. We had to sort of talk them down from preparing a PowerPoint presentation to be going on at the same time, but we managed to do that, and they drummed up about 80, and it was it was unlike anything they would normally have experienced. That was beautiful. We had churches that said our congregation won't get it, and then they sort of came back to us after a while and said, go on then. And we had the most wonderful service there. We had just all sorts of experiences. Churches that said, okay, you can come and do it, but we can't have, we're not having the readings in King James. And then next time we came back, they specifically asked for it. All sorts of things. That was phase 2 of the journey. Phase 3, we've just teamed up with a church in the East End, All Saints Poplar, and we now have a base. So we've gone from being roving to sort of living there, and we have just started living of each month, and that's given us real stability. And we are just now in the process of growing a congregation. It's not a prayer book church. It's a church where sort of hymn lyrics contain the word man are sort of bowdlerized, and they are very sort of their normal services don't place that sort of value on traditional language and traditional liturgy. And I'm not saying that to complain about them. I'm saying that to say how sort of open-minded they've been, and just how welcome it is that they're allowing us to sort of grow and plant a new congregation there, when it's just completely different to their normal style of things. And it's just been a wonderful experience for us, something that's given us a new lease of life. And that's it, really. I think I've probably reached the end of my time, but if other people are thinking of doing similar and want to know about the sort of technicalities of establishing choirs, which are funny beasts and notorious in churches for causing growing their own lives and sort of doing all sorts of strange things, I don't pretend that what we did would work in every context, but if anyone wants to speak to me outside of this about how how we did it, and just gain insights and some of.
I think we've lost him. Are you there, Jonathan? All right, that was a bit of an unstable connection. So hopefully Jonathan will be able to rejoin us and we can pick up on his points. He'd come to the end. So I think we'll go next to our next speaker, who is going to be the Reverend David Craven, who is going to tell us about Evensong and Curry in Preston, I believe. David, welcome. Over to you.
Greetings from the far north. It's lovely to be with you all. When Bradley asked me to do this, I agreed simply because it was Bradley. You can't say no to Bradley. So just to share, really, I feel a bit of a fraud because this is a project that's really in its infancy. So if you're expecting a story of, packing the church out, then I'm going to disappoint you massively, okay? So this is a reality of church life, from small acorns and all that. We're praying for big things to happen. But St George's is located right in the city centre of Preston. Our parish, it's quite a poor parish, mainly made up of students at the University of Central Lancashire, and retail businesses, that sort of thing. So we don't have much of a resident population. Most people who come to St George's travel in because they like the style of the worship, which for many years it has simply been the staple diet of Holy Communion, the Eucharist, Sunday morning. But there was an expression of trying something new in the evenings from those that are more musically minded, and I hold my hands up, I'm not musical in the slightest. We said, well, let's try something on a monthly basis. So we started something August, September time, and it's straight Evensong, that there's no frills to it. I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint those that love the King James version of the Bible. We actually use a modern translation for our readings, which is the English Standard Version. But we find that actually some of the cadences in that are very beautiful, despite it being a modern biblical translation. So if you're wanting to use a modern translation alongside the Book of Common Prayer, I do recommend the ESV. It works very well. We started, and we got together a scratch choir, and they would come in 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, rehearse for a little bit, and then we'd have the service at 6. We don't own any prayer books in our church. We're still waiting for a reprint, so we haven't got any. But what it has forced us to do is produce our own service sheets, and we've done that. And one of our mantras at St George's has really been, just go for it. There's never going to be the perfect time, but just go for it. So we went for it, and we aimed for excellence. The phrase "it'll do," which we hear in so many churches up and down the land, is banned at St George's. It'll do is not acceptable. So we aim for the very best, because we want the people that come to feel that they're valued, and that this is a special event, and that they are important, and that they matter. There's always a temptation, isn't there, when you start something, to think, oh, no one's turned up, so we're going to pack it in. But we've kept going. We had one last week. We had 30 at our service, and every service that we have once a month ends up in a local curry house, and probably a dozen people go to that. So it's always a service tied in with food, which I think is a biblical thing, because Jesus loved to party, he loved food, and so it builds fellowship. Interestingly, one of the things that somebody said to me at the end of last week's service, they said, Evensong, I just love it. I can just let it wash over me, and it's the one reason I've never become a Roman Catholic, because of Evensong. And I thought that's very interesting. But we heard mentioned earlier about that divine presence, and there is something, isn't there? We can all point to it when we've been to a service of Evensong, that there is something special about it. you can't quite put your finger on it, but there's a tangible awareness of God's presence by his Spirit. There's sort of that spiritual depth and richness to the service, and just letting the service do its job, really, and making that whole experience a quality one. And so I would say to anyone who's sort of watching this and thinking, well, what should I do? I want to do something. I would say just go for it. Take risks. My wife, who comes from a Baptist background, she's found real blessings through Evensong, and her mother is a deacon in the Baptist church, and quite often uses the prayer book whenever she's leading a service in the Baptist church, which is interesting. Moving forward, what do we want to do? Well, we want to try and connect with the university and the students there, and looking at developing possibly choral scholarships that could really help advance and move the service of Evensong to another level. And that's something we're thinking through, and we're having discussions with people at UCLan as to whether that might be possible. So there we are. There's a little bit about Evensong and Curry. And if you want to check us out, then please do so. And I believe, Bradley, you're coming and joining us for Curry in the new year at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, again, congratulations on another fantastic initiative. Can I bring it back to practicalities and ask you one question? You said as a slight throwaway, we got together a scratch choir. Now, music is the thing that I've been studying, the thing that I specialise in. Getting together a scratch choir can be quite a difficult thing to do. Can you tell us a bit about, if somebody was wanting to do that, have you got any tips about how you might go about it?
I mean, we're very blessed at St George's in that we've got two young men who are very gifted musicians, and have got lots of local contacts, which they draw on. And so they just approached people and said, look, we're trying this new thing. Would you be prepared to come and sing? And as I say, we probably had a dozen people there for the scratch choir. As I say, I'm not musical at all, but sitting there in the sanctuary and listening to them, it was absolutely stunning. And these people had kind of just come together 2 hours before, practiced some anthems, and off they went. And it was a beautiful sight. So to me, it just said that, yes, we aim for excellence, but you don't have to have cathedral standard to make a very beautiful impact on people's lives.